Montana Territory. Late spring of 1877. The sun had barely crested the Absaroka Range when Kendra Ellison threw her riding cloak over her shoulders and fled the only life she had ever known. She rode fast through the tall grass and sagebrush, her skirts bundled under her legs, the hem already torn by the time she crossed the shallow creek south of Livingston. Her hands were scraped raw from scrambling over the barn rafters, but she had stolen her father's second-best mare and a water flask, and that was enough. Inside her stays, tucked flat against her ribs, was the letter of marriage contract her father had signed. No one had asked her. No one had cared that she had barely turned 19. And no one had listened when she said she would rather die than marry Wade Haskin, a man 20 years her elder who had once pulled a knife on a stable boy for touching his horse the wrong way. Behind her, she knew the Haskins would come quick. Wade had money and muscle, and between them and her father's pride, the search would be swift and ruthless. By dusk, her horse stumbled from exhaustion. Kendra slid to the ground and pressed her forehead to the mare's neck, whispering thanks for carrying her this far. She had no map, no plan. But she had gotten away. She trekked on foot through the dark, her boots sinking into the mud left behind by a late-season rain 2 days before. Each sound made her flinch: a snapped twig, a coyote's call, even the flap of her own cloak in the wind. When she saw the lantern light swinging slowly from the porch of a lone cabin nestled in the hills, she almost turned around. But her legs ached, and the cold was sinking deeper into her bones by the minute. The man who opened the door was tall, broad in the shoulders, and had the kind of face that looked carved from the land itself: strong jaw, wind-roughened skin, and dark hair just long enough to curl behind his ears. He held a rifle in one hand, but his eyes, steady, wary, quiet, settled on her like a weight. "You lost?" he asked. "No," Kendra said, though her voice trembled. "I ran." He stared at her for a long moment, then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "My name's Jonah Fletcher," he said. "You can come in." She hesitated only a second before stepping into the warmth. The cabin smelled of coffee and smoke and something rich cooking over the hearth. A cot was pushed against the far wall, a rifle rack above it. Everything was clean but plain. A man's life lived alone. Jonah poured her a tin cup of coffee without asking her name. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the heat. He leaned against the table, arms folded, watching her with that same calm stillness. "Who's chasing you?" Kendra looked into the fire. "A man. My father promised me to him." "I did not agree." Jonah nodded once. "How far back do you think they are?" "I left before dawn. They will have found my note by now. Maybe they are a few hours behind." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a while. He poured himself a cup and sat across from her. "You got anywhere you're aiming to go?" "No," she shook her head. "Just away." The silence between them stretched, but it did not feel cold. It felt like space being offered. "You can stay here tonight," Jonah said. "Get some sleep." "You look like you need it." "I do." He gave her the cot, and he dragged a blanket to the floor for himself. She tried to protest, but he just shook his head. "You are not sleeping on the ground after riding for your life." The next 2 days passed in a haze of quiet routine. Jonah cooked simple meals, chopped wood, and made no demands of her. He never asked for details unless she gave them. She helped where she could, sweeping, washing dishes, tending to the mare who had strained a leg, and she watched him. The way he moved with the land, the way he spoke only when there was something worth saying. He was not like anyone she had known, not loud or cruel or trying to impress, just steady. On the 3rd morning, she woke to voices outside the cabin. Jonah was already standing by the door, rifle in hand, his expression hard. She crept to the window and saw 2 men on horses. One of them was Wade Haskin. Her heart dropped to her stomach. "You sure that mare's not in there?" Wade called. "She's got my bride with her." Jonah stepped out, calm as ever. "No women here. We've been told otherwise." "You were told wrong." Wade's eyes narrowed. "You hiding her?" Jonah did not move. "You want to come closer, I cannot stop you. But you will not like how it ends." Wade leaned forward in the saddle. "That girl is mine." "No," Jonah said, voice like thunder without volume. "She is not." Wade stared for a long second, then spat into the dirt and turned his horse. "This ain't over." They rode off, kicking up dust, and Kendra realized her hands were shaking. Jonah came back inside and closed the door gently. She looked at him, words stuck in her throat. "Why did you do that?" He met her gaze, steady and sure. "Because you did not want him." "That is enough." She felt something shift inside her, not just relief, but something warmer. That night she sat beside him on the porch while coyotes called in the distance. "I am sorry I brought trouble here," she murmured. He glanced at her. "You brought yourself." "That is not trouble." She turned to him. "You do not even know me." "I know you ran from something wrong. I know you are brave. I know you look after that horse better than most men I have ever met." Her breath hitched. She looked down at her hands. "I do not know what comes next," she said. "I do," he said quietly. "You stay, I will see to it they do not come near you again." She lifted her eyes to his. "And what if I want more than safety?" His voice was low. "Then you tell me what you want." She reached for his hand. He took it. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had chosen something real. Rain came 2 days later, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the ridgeline and turn the yard to thick brown slop. Kendra stood near the hearth, sleeves rolled above her elbows, hands wrist deep in flour. Jonah had built a bread oven into the corner of the fireplace, stone-lined and cleverly vented. She'd asked if she could try her hand at it. He'd nodded once, handed her a worn wooden spoon, and gone out to split cedar. The smell of wet earth drifted through the cracks in the wall, chinking. She listened to the rhythmic strike of axe on wood, the kind of sound that didn't need watching to be understood. Steady, deliberate, patient. Each swing came with purpose, like everything Jonah did. When he returned, damp curls clinging to his temple, he set the kindling by the door, shook the rain from his hat, and looked toward the hearth. His hands were red from the cold, but he didn't complain. He never did. "You baking for the whole valley?" he asked, nodding toward the 3 round loaves resting on a cloth. "It passes the time," she said, brushing flour from her cheek. "Besides, you had barely anything salted left. If you're going to keep feeding me, I ought to earn it." She expected him to argue, but instead he reached for a dry towel and tossed it over his shoulder. "Then you'll want to check that bottom one. This stove runs hotter on the left." She did, and it had browned too fast. She muttered under her breath, then caught him watching her with a small lift in his brow. Not amusement exactly, something quieter. "You ever think about going back east?" she asked, not looking at him. "I did once," he said after a pause, "but I buried my brother out here. Didn't seem right to leave." "What happened to him?" He sat on the edge of the table, elbows on his knees. "Caught a fever one winter in '72. I rode all the way to Bozeman for quinine, but the pass was snowed over on the way back. He was gone before I got home." She didn't speak for a while. The rain softened against the roof, then picked up again. "I didn't know you had a brother." "Only one," he said. "We came out from Missouri together. He wanted to trap, I wanted to ranch. We met in the middle." She folded the towel over the cooling bread. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, like he'd heard it enough times not to need more. "What about you?" he asked. "You planning to stay west of the Yellowstone?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't think I ever knew what I wanted. I was raised to do as I was told. Every day was dresses and posture and embroidery. I used to press flowers in books just so I'd have something to look at besides stitched samplers." Jonah leaned back slightly. You kept any of them? I brought one book. It's in my saddlebag. The pages are coming loose. You should show me sometime. She glanced at him. Would you want to see them? I'd like to know what you chose to keep. That silenced her. No one had ever asked her that before. Later, as the fire burned low and the light dipped into amber, she fetched the book. It was wrapped in oilcloth, the corners worn soft from years of handling. She handed it over, and Jonah opened it on the table with the same care he gave his tools. He turned the pages slowly. Each one held a pressed bloom, dried flat and labeled in a narrow, slanted hand. This one, he asked, tapping a faded sprig, prairie smoke. I picked it the day I turned 15. I'd snuck out past the orchard and found it growing wild. I thought it looked like a girl's blush. He studied it, thoughtful. It does. She felt the air shift between them, not sudden, not sharp. Just closer. He didn't speak again until he reached the last page where a single yellow daisy was pressed beneath the word freedom. I picked that the day I rode, she said. He looked up at her, then closed the book. You can leave it here if you want. I'll keep it safe. She swallowed. That would mean I'm staying. His eyes didn't waver. Would that be so bad? She didn't answer aloud, but she didn't take the book back either. By the week's end, the storm had passed, and they rode out together to check the fence line. The land stretched wide and quiet, softened by new green shoots that had sprung up while they'd waited out the rain. At the ridge, she dismounted and stood beside him. Below, the valley rolled out in soft folds, clouds casting slow shadows over the grass. He didn't speak, but he reached out, gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek where the wind had blown it across her face. She didn't move away. I don't know how to be anything but careful, she said. You don't have to be anything else, he replied. When she looked at him, really looked, she saw not just the man who had turned Wade Haskin away, but the one who learned to live with sorrow without letting it harden him. A man who made space for silence, who asked nothing she didn't offer first. I'd like to try, she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded and reached for her hand again. The first calf came early, just after dawn. Kendra had followed Jonah out to the north pasture, where the grazing cattle had begun to bed closer to the trees, sensing the season shift before the humans did. A heifer had gone down hard near the edge of a frozen creek, her sides heaving, eyes rimmed with panic. Jonah didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her in the churned mud, speaking low and steady while Kendra stood back, her breath frosting in the cold. "Hand me that length of rope," he said without looking up. She moved quickly, stepping over a patch of ice and passing him the coiled line. His fingers worked swift and sure, looping the heifer's hind legs to brace for the pull. The calf was stuck, breech. Kendra crouched beside him, squinting against the sun that filtered through the bare cottonwoods. "What can I do?" He glanced at her once. "Keep her calm. Talk soft, hold her head if she thrashes. I'll manage the rest." She did as he asked, pressing a hand gently to the heifer's neck, murmuring nonsense words that sounded almost like lullabies. The cow's breath steamed in short bursts, but she didn't fight. Jonah worked the calf free with a grunt and a twist, his shoulders slick with sweat despite the chill. The newborn hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and afterbirth, still and silent. Kendra's stomach turned. Then Jonah rubbed the small body with a piece of old canvas, rough and insistent, until the calf let out a thin, wet cry. Kendra exhaled slowly. "Is it going to live?" He nodded, wiping his brow. "Strong enough. Just needed help getting here." They stayed long enough to watch the calf find its legs, swaying uncertainly beside its mother. Kendra felt a strange tightness in her chest, like something had cracked open and let light in. Back at the cabin, she rinsed the blood from her sleeves, watching the water swirl red into the basin. Jonah had already hung his coat by the stove, his shirt damp and clinging to his back. "You've done that before," she said. "More times than I can count. Some go bad. This one didn't." She dried her hands and leaned against the table. I'd never seen something born before. He looked up from where he was pouring oats into a tin. "You kept steady." "I was terrified." "You didn't show it," she hesitated. "That's not how I was raised. I was always told to keep clean, be quiet, stay away from anything that smells like work." He set the tin down. "And do you miss that?" she thought for a moment. "Not once." The next day, they rode out to the edge of the property, where a stand of fir trees marked the border between Jonah's grazing land and a stretch of disputed territory that had never been properly claimed after the last treaty talks fell through. The air was sharp, the wind carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth. Jonah pointed toward a distant ridge. "South of that slope's where I plan to run the fence come summer. If the melt's kind, I'll get it done before branding." Kendra squinted at the land. "That's a long way." "I've got time." She turned to him. "Why are you showing me all this?" He didn't answer right away. "Because I want you to see what I'm building, not just the land. The life." She let that settle between them. Then she asked, "Did you ever think about having someone here with you?" "Before I came," a long pause. "I did, once. But she left before the first snow, said it was too lonesome." Kendra nodded slowly. "I'm not afraid of being alone, I just don't want to be forgotten." Jonah met her gaze. "You won't be." That night, she found herself standing by the window long after he'd gone to bed. The moonlight spilled across the floor, catching the edge of her pressed flower book where it lay on the shelf. She hadn't opened it since handing it to Jonah. She walked over, ran her fingers along the spine, then picked it up and turned to the blank pages at the back. She laid a new bloom inside a tiny purple wildflower she'd picked earlier near the fence line. She didn't know its name. It didn't matter. She pressed it down carefully, then closed the book and held it to her chest. In the stillness, she heard Jonah shift in the other room, the cot creaking as he turned. She crossed the floor barefoot and slipped through the curtain that separated the sleeping space from the hearth. He opened his eyes when she came near but didn't speak. She sat beside him on the edge of the cot. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Not just for safety, not because I'm running, because when I look out at this land, I don't feel afraid anymore." He sat up, the blanket falling to his waist. "Then stay. Not because you have to, because you want to." "I do." He reached for her hand, and this time when their fingers twined together, there was no hesitation. Outside, the wind shifted and the first frogs of spring began to sing. By late April, the thaw had reached the upper slope, and the first shoots of lupine and balsam root dotted the basin. Kendra stood at the split rail fence, her apron damp with creek water from rinsing the last of Jonah's winter pans. The air held that fragile mix of warmth and leftover chill, the kind that made her pull her shawl tighter though the sun was bright. Behind her, she heard Jonah's boots in the gravel, not hurried but purposeful. "There's a man came from the West Trail," he said. "Stopped at the river crossing. Looked like he was trying to decide whether to ride up this far." She turned, shading her eyes. "Was he alone?" "Looked it. Had a long coat and a black gelding, lean built. Didn't wave, didn't tie off. Just watched the ridge a while, then turned back." Her stomach clenched. "Could have been someone from the Haskins men." "Could have been, but he didn't come close. If it was Wade, he'd have come shouting." She nodded slowly. "Then it's someone new." Jonah leaned on the fence beside her. "We'll keep eyes open. I've got snares laid out past the creek. If he crosses over, I'll know." Kendra said nothing for a moment. Then, "I want to learn how to shoot." He looked at her, not surprised. "You ever handled a rifle?" "No, just watched my brother once. He was 13. That was the only time my father let him touch it." "You'll need to start with something lighter. I've got a carbine in the shed." short-stocked, kicks less. They walked to the shed together. Inside, the smell of oil and old leather clung to the walls. Jonah took down the carbine from a high peg and checked the chamber before handing it to her. It felt heavier than she expected. They walked to the edge of the pasture, where a row of rusted tin cans had been set on an old log. Jonah showed her how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to square her stance, how to breathe. "Don't pull the trigger," he said. "Squeeze it like you're wringing water from cloth." She missed the first 2 shots. The third knocked a can clean off the log. "Again," he said. By the time her shoulder ached and her ears rang, she'd hit 4 in a row. "I'll clean it later," she said, handing the rifle back. "No need," he said. "It's yours now," she blinked. "You're giving it to me. You said you wanted to learn. That means you'll need it more than me. My hands are full enough keeping the fence up." That night, after she banked the fire and hung the kettle, she found him in the barn brushing down the mare. He didn't look up when she stepped into the stall. "I know I haven't said it plain," she began, "but I want to build something here. Not just stay, not just get by." Jonah ran the brush down the horse's flank. "You've been doing that already." "I mean something lasting." He turned then, eyes catching hers in the dim light. "What do you see when you think about that?" "I see a garden behind the house. I see shelves full of jars come autumn. I see a second chair on the porch you don't have to carry back in every night." He set the brush down. "And do you see me in that?" She stepped closer. "I wouldn't want it without you." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers. "Then let's build it. Day by day. No rush, no running." Their foreheads touched, and the barn around them faded to quiet. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side. Jonah taught her to mend broken gate hinges, to spot a sick calf by the way it drooped its ears. Kendra showed him how to steep willow bark when his knuckles swelled from the cold, how to patch a torn shirt with a stitch so fine it disappeared. They learned each other's habits not from words, but from days that rose and set in rhythm. One morning she woke to find a stack of cedar planks leaning against the cabin wall. "What's this?" she asked, stepping outside in her bare feet. "New door," Jonah said. "Figure if this place is ours, it ought to have one that fits proper." She touched the worn threshold beneath her toes. "You said ours." "I meant it." And when he lifted the first board, she set her hand beside his. By early May, the last of the snow retreated to the highest ridges, and the river ran fast with meltwater. The frost had lifted from the soil, loosening the earth beneath the cabin's back slope where Jonah had cleared a narrow strip for planting. Kendra knelt in the tilled rows with a sack of dried beans and a small hand spade, sleeves rolled high, collar darkened where sweat met sun. Her fingernails were rimmed with dirt, and her knees ached, but she felt something settle in her like the ground itself had taken her in. Jonah was mending the chicken wire along the northern edge of the barn, back turned, sleeves pushed past his elbows. When she stood to stretch, he looked over, wiping his brow with the inside of his wrist. "You'll want to space those wider," he said. "The ground's rich, they'll run close." She picked up a seed and held it between 2 fingers. "I thought I'd try my way first." He nodded once. "Then we'll see what grows." After supper, she sat on the porch with a needle in hand, working the last edge of a quilt square she'd pieced from old flannel and grained sackcloth. Jonah carved a length of pine into a hook for his saddle rig, the curls of wood falling soft to the floor. The air held the scent of cottonwood, thick and sweet, and the sky burned the color of iron before fading to blue ash. Kendra laid the square across her lap. "I had a dream last night. I was back in my father's parlor, but it was empty. No carpet, no books. The windows were boarded. I walked from room to room and couldn't find a soul." Jonah paused, blade mid-stroke. "You think it meant something?" She looked out past the yard, where the last light glinted off the water trough. "I think it meant I'm not going back. Even if I had reason to, there'd be nothing left for me there." He set the carving aside. "You've done more here in a season than most folks do in years. That quilt, that garden, the mare, everything you've touched has held." She turned to him. "And you? Have I held here too?" He didn't answer right away, just reached out, took her hand in his. "I never expected anyone to walk into my life and stay, but you did. And the days feel different now, not just full right." She let her fingers wrap around his. "Then I'll keep staying." That night, under the weight of quilts and the hush of wind against the cabin walls, Kendra reached across the narrow bed they now shared and laid her palm over his chest. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her hand. "I used to feel like I was always waiting," she whispered, "for someone to let me speak, to see me." Jonah turned toward her, voice low. "You don't have to wait here." She pressed her forehead to his. "I know." In June, Jonah rode to the trading post at Shields River to barter tanned hides for salt and sugar. Kendra stayed behind, working the loom he'd repaired for her in the barn's lean-to. She wove strips of wool and cotton into simple patterns, humming as she worked, the rhythm of the shuttle steady against the frame. When he returned, she met him at the gate with a new scarf slung over her shoulder, faded blue, the color of the spring sky before sunrise. "For you," she said, wrapping it around his neck. He ran a hand down the cloth, thumb catching on one of her uneven stitches. "You make a man feel like he's worth wearing something fine. You are." In July, they built the second chair for the porch. Jonah measured, cut, and sanded the pine while Kendra stained it with boiled walnut husks. When it dried, they sat side by side, her hand resting on his knee, watching thunderheads roll over the distant peaks. One morning, as the sun crept over the ridge, Jonah slid a small cedar box across the table. No ribbon, no flourish, just plain wood carved with a single forget-me-not on the lid. Kendra opened it to find a simple ring iron, shaped by hand, with a faint ridge where his thumb must have slipped while hammering. "I never thought I'd ask a thing like this," he said, "but I want to build every year with you, not just every day. Will you marry me? Here on this land. Just us and the sky." She said nothing at first, just touched the ring with trembling fingers. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They married under the cottonwoods where the calf had been born that spring. No preacher, no paper, just a promise spoken with hands joined and eyes open. Jonah placed the ring on her finger, and they sealed the vow with a kiss that tasted of wind and wild mint. That night, they danced barefoot in the dirt behind the cabin, the stars wide above them, the mountains silent witnesses. Years passed, and the garden grew thick. The mare bore a foal, then another. Kendra's loom filled the cabin with woven blankets and shawls. Jonah built a second barn farther down the slope, and together they opened a small trading shed for passers-by, trappers, travelers, folks looking for dry goods and honest shelter. In time, folks began to call their place Ellison Ridge, after the wildflower book Kendra kept on the shelf above the hearth. She pressed a new flower into it each spring, the pages thick now with years. On the porch, the two chairs sat side by side. In the evenings, they watched the sun dip behind the ridges, fingers laced, no words needed. And when winter came, as it always did, they faced it together, quiet, steady, hand in hand, knowing the thaw would return, and with it, another season of growing.